Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital, the Doctor of Digital podcast. And I got an exciting guest this morning, and I'm looking forward to it as I have been for a long time. For a lot of people, they say that they see the industry from the outside. Jim Vinoski has spent a career inside the plants, the boardrooms, and the decisions that actually build things. I'm Mick, the Doctor of Digital, and this episode is about American manufacturing, not as nostalgia, but as a strategy, not as policy, but as operational reality. At one point, Jim explains why the companies that quietly outperform everyone else aren't chasing disruption, they're mastering execution, and why the modest forces of American manufacturing may be the real competitive advantage. And with that, I want to welcome Jim to the program. Jim, good to see you today.
Hey, Mick, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm not going to complain because no one's listening. At one point, you're explaining a lot about American manufacturing. But before we talk about the book, the consulting work, or the companies that you've studied, I want to go back to the beginning. You spent years studying hundreds of manufacturing companies long before it became part of the national conversation. What did you start noticing about the leaders and organizations that quietly performed everyone else?
Yeah, I did. And my study goes back to having the opportunity to write about manufacturing for Forbes, which I did for 7 years, and then launched my own Substack after that. But going through that, I just started out really wanting to tell what American companies make, because so many people think we don't make anything anymore, and nothing could be further from the truth. And as I dug into that, I myself had a multi-decade career, front lines of manufacturing, so I've seen lots of things up close and personal. But one person in manufacturing only ever touches the tiniest little sliver of everything going on. So that opportunity with Forbes allowed me to see companies in all kinds of different areas of manufacturing all over the country, and in fact all over the world. And what really rose to the top for me is the ones that have been around generations and continue to outperform no matter what vertical they're in, whether it's highly automated or highly manual. They're all very focused on keeping their people engaged, happy, retaining them, developing them, really treating people as individuals versus just the workforce.
So before the books and the consulting, what pulled you into manufacturing as a focus in the first place?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One is, as a teenager, I got very heavily into bicycling, both riding and the mechanical aspects. I've always been mechanically inclined, and that mechanical side is kind of what led me to my career direction. I went and got a mechanical engineering degree, and then was recruited for my first job into the chemical industry. So, could have done a bunch of different things with that degree, but landed in plant that made PVC down in the middle of Mississippi, and immediately came to learn that that degree gave me a lot of knowledge that plenty of people don't have. But at the same time, when you're in a factory, the true experts are those people who've been running the machines and fixing the machines their whole lives. And so it gave me that personal appreciation for people as individuals. And then I had the opportunity to branch out from there and go into several different areas of manufacturing, most of my career being with General Mills and food and beverage.
So you've studied over 500 industrial companies. When did you realize that there was a larger story unfolding?
The first indication was early in my Forbes work, just seeing a real divide between private companies and public companies, because private companies have the advantage, the luxury really, of taking a much longer view. The one unfortunate thing of publicly traded companies, it's all about the next quarter, and it's all about showing the right numbers that whatever the investors and the money people are focused on at that given instant. And so to me, what I found was that led to some bad decisions that, number one, just had us not as competitive overall as an industry in America, but really in the worst cases led to a lot of the offshoring and loss of whole segments of our industry. And then that kind of led into, okay, what are those companies that take the longer view focused on? And that's where it really made the difference in understanding that people aspect.
There's a lot of talk about reindustrialization. What are people getting wrong about that?
I don't think it's so much people getting wrong. It's just there's so much that has to happen for us to make that stick. I keep saying we're in a moment I haven't seen in my, going on 4 decades in manufacturing, where all the stars are aligned and we truly can bring a lot of that manufacturing that went overseas back to our shores. And you see it happening now. I mean, reshoring is happening as we speak, and that's phenomenal. But we're not tackling some of the fundamentals. Again, a lot of those same governing principles, especially in the public companies, remain in effect. And the other problem is so much else of what drove our industry offshore was things like regulations. And I'm not going to castigate all regulations, but you look at now, the National Association for Manufacturers did a study a few years ago showing manufacturers have to grapple with nearly 300,000 individual regulations. And I can tell you from reading the Code of Federal Register on what those amount to, that's millions and millions of pages of incredibly dense requirements that our manufacturers have to adhere to each and every day. And it's gotten to the point where we don't even talk about it anymore. It's become this, that's just the way things are. And I think if we continue to let that be the case, we're going to have a bit of trouble having reshoring stick.
It's in a difficult situation, obviously, but what separates the thriving manufacturing companies from those that are struggling today?
Well, a mix of things. I mean, one is we've touched on already, and it's really that governing philosophy. If you're just in it to turn a buck and you're treating your people poorly, treating your people as assets, it's going to catch up to you. And it's unfortunate because it has caught up to a lot of companies in the past, and we don't seem to be learning that lesson. But it's also a bit of luck. You look at industries that have thrived. We've got, food and beverage is still a strong sector, one that's struggling in a few different areas, but we still have plenty of food and beverage companies here in America. But if you look at textiles, for example, that was almost entirely driven offshore. We make 3% of what we wear today. And so, it's finding that right vertical where you can compete given today's business situation, and then focusing on the right things, taking that longer view, treating your people right, and a piece of it's kind of feathering your own nest. If you're looking for the past to come back, where we had trade schools galore and we had kids that were taking their shop classes and ready to go into an industrial environment from the get-go, that doesn't exist anymore, or at least doesn't exist in the numbers we need. And so I say every company needs to be engaged in workforce creation, engaging with your local school systems, community colleges, trade schools, and really working hand in hand to recreate that industrial workforce.
Now, the book has to do with this phrase, really interesting, modest heroes. So who are they? And can tell us more about that concept.
Yeah, the title is American Manufacturing, 22 Tales of Integrity, Ingenuity, and the Modest Heroes Who Built a Nation. And I truly believe that. You look at the success of America, and it largely rides on our productive capacity, especially during the world wars. And the modest heroes are all of those people who are the true unsung heroes of making all that happen. The executives aren't the heroes. We've got plenty of people who ran companies. I think of people like Henry Kaiser or Andrew Jackson Higgins, who were part of winning World War II. But in the end, it's the productive people on the front lines who are hands-on, making things, fixing things, and making America's industrial might real day in, day out.
Why do you think we don't hear more about these leaders, these modest individuals?
I wish I knew the answer to that. It's kind of funny because I went into industry in the late 80s, and I was told by a career development professor when I was in college, don't go into manufacturing. It's a dead end. It's going away. And so you think about that, almost 40 years ago, we were already dissuading,
Mm.
not to sing my own praises, but I think I'm a little bit talented, dissuading talented people from going into industry. We maligned skilled trades for 3 generations straight, and now we're scratching our heads over why we don't have the numbers. We ignored the last generation to have skilled trades and industrial careers touted as a positive were the baby boomers, who are fast now disappearing, and were the largest generation. So we didn't even have the numbers to replace them, period, much less if we're denigrating the jobs that we need to replace. And so it's a whole mix of kind of cultural things that were stupid at the time, quite frankly, and we just didn't see it, and now we're paying the price.
So when it comes to being leaders, what leadership traits show up repeatedly in those successful plants?
Well, if you think about the company leaders, it's truly valuing what the people who are on the front lines are doing every day. And unfortunately, too often now, especially in the bigger corporations, our leaders are completely disconnected from the plant floor. So they don't see what people are doing. And I can tell you firsthand, when you've got a plant down, everyone in the factory knows that that's a crisis, and they're all acting like that. And so, I mean, I've personally spent Christmas Day in a factory. I've spent days on end working on problems. I'll never forget a guy when I was putting some new equipment in at General Mills, probably a couple decades ago. I needed help from a vendor, and a guy shows up, and we were working together almost 2 solid days. By the time we got to know each other a little better, and he let it slip that he had been married 3 days beforehand. That's the kind of sacrifice you get from people on the front lines every day, and we don't value it. Executives don't understand that that's what's happening, and so we think, yeah, people are just out there doing a job and punching the clock, and it's way beyond that.
In terms of leaders, then what do they need to do? Is this about culture? Is it process, discipline? What is that?
It's again a whole mix of things. The number one thing is, I think leaders need to get back out into the real world. They need to get on the factory floor and spend real time. Too often they'll say, yeah, I'm getting out in the factory, but what's happening is they're getting out for a dog and pony show. The plant's been all cleaned up, and everyone makes running top notch when the execs come through, and then they heave a sigh of relief and let it go back to normal after the fact. Executives need to be out there engaged long enough to see, here are the problems that we're having, here are the things that are eating these frontline workers lunch, and then being engaged in providing solutions. And I think as you do that, then you get that natural, reinvigoration of valuing the people who are really doing the jobs and making the sacrifices. But I also think we've got a whole lot of work to do around knocking down barriers, whether that's the regulations I mentioned before, stupid HR rules. I don't hold HR in high regard right now. I think they've far too often engaged more in creating the conditions to make HR more important than actually solving problems. And you can look at one end to the other in what makes it difficult to run a manufacturing operation. And there's just numerous examples of things like that, where we need to streamline the business processes and get rid of those barriers that we've created to make ourselves more competitive.
Yeah, it'd be important to scale. So you have advised on all kinds of areas of strategy. What mistakes do executives make when they're trying to scale manufacturing?
I think one of the big things right now is not understanding what the investment entails. Part of that's from the finance world. We've actually got finance measures now that dissuade ownership of productive assets. And that's also driven some of our offshoring, but it's also driven bad behaviors around starving the capital investment it takes to establish systems correctly in the first place and maintain them in operating condition. The capital it takes to run a manufacturing company is much more intensive than a lot of other business operations. And people need to understand that. If you're going in and thinking you're getting returns, like a tech job, it's not going to happen. And yet you have to have those productive assets and that capability, if nothing else, from a national defense perspective. But also just it's it's essential to the health of an economy, especially one like America's.
And it's a difference and a gap between strategy and the factory floor. So I'm wondering, where does the strategy break down on the factory floor?
Well, those disconnects are part of it. I think there are a lot of great strategies coming from on high that can take our companies in the right direction. And then if you have that disconnect and you're not setting yourselves up right to deliver on it, you're just setting a trap for yourself. I look at one example of what I'm advising a lot of people to do now is to make sure you're looking at diversifying your customer base. Don't put all your eggs in one industry basket. I mean, here in Michigan, the horror stories of the auto industry ups and downs, where suppliers, small companies, got totally wedded to the car business, and a lot of them don't survive when the car business takes a dip. If you do that, if you're taking a strategy like that and you're diversifying, now you've got to invest in additional assets to make different things, still aligned with what you've already been making, but probably a little different from what you made for one industry segment. And again, so understanding that that's going to be a big upfront capital outlay and probably a more sizable input over time, and being ready to invest to the degree it takes to be successful is critical. And if you don't go in with your eyes open on that, you can get launched into a new industry segment and just as fast, kind of burn up on reentry because you don't have the right things in place.
You mentioned AR, and that is important, but what role does workforce development play in long-term competitiveness?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've been writing and speaking on that for quite some time, and it's still, I still get little shocks every so often. I saw Palmer Luckey speaking just this morning, a video of him at an industry event where he was on a panel and talking about how basically it's like you've got one person in the 10 that we truly need to deliver on all our objectives. I think the problem is much bigger than what people truly realize because, for example, I just did some work with a research outfit that I'm tied in with around the nuclear energy workforce. And people realize there's going to be a shortfall there. But as we looked into it, it's like we're looking at it in isolation. So here's the numbers we have of skilled workers and nuclear trained technicians and engineers, and here's what we're going to need in the future, and here's the gap. And what we don't analyze is, okay, that's us in isolation looking at it from the nuclear perspective. What about all these other things that are also needing a big boost in the numbers of skilled tradespeople and engineers and technicians? And that's the data centers and the AI revolution. That's rebuilding our aging infrastructure like the grid and pipelines. That's reindustrialization. We've got multiple different claimants on this same pool of technical labor. And I think we need a much more broad-based study of, okay, if you look at all of those areas that are wanting to do a whole lot more in coming years, and then you do a complete analysis of what the shortfall is, we'll get the real picture, and I guarantee you it's not going to be pretty.
Well, we could turn things around, so I'm going to try to be a little optimistic here, but what are the high-performing operators doing differently right now to get us there?
Yeah, so, I look at, in that nuclear workforce work, I'm singing the praises of Holtec, which is a company that historically did plant shutdowns and decommissionings, and they got the opportunity at a plant 45 minutes from me here in Michigan, Palisades nuclear plant, to purchase the plant and restart it after it had been shut down. And they're looking at having that plant repowered probably this fall after a 3-year shutdown. It'll be the first major restart of a nuclear reactor in America ever. And then they're going to do a fast follow and install 2 of their small modular reactors, 2 300 megawatt reactors, and basically almost double the capacity of that site. Well, obviously they need a whole lot of people to make all of that happen. And they've already been engaging with Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, with Lake Superior Community College down in Benton Harbor. They've even been engaging with their local school systems in Van Buren County. because they know this isn't just a short-term problem, it's developing that workforce of the future, and they're in it for the long term. And so just really engaging with those schools on what their needs are now and what they might do to get people trained as quickly as they can, and then what those longer term needs are going to be, and really looking to partner on establishing new programs to feed that pipeline. And I really sing their praises for jumping ahead of that and understanding that that's part of the work they have to do to make that a success.
I was wondering about the process a bit, since you've changed, and what changed for you, because you took decades of observation and put it into a book. So what was that process like? How'd you do that?
Fortunately, it was kind of a progression. I agreed to start writing about manufacturing for Forbes, 8 or 9 years ago now, and spent 7 years doing a number of these stories. And a good chunk of the book is taking some of those previous stories I had written and expanding those into chapters on each of the companies. But then it also had me looking for opportunities, other companies that were great stories. And so I wrapped in more that I hadn't even written about yet, and just kind of added chapters with the cool stories that I came across that I thought were a good fit for the book, and wound up with those 22 in total. And, kind of just wrote each one as an individual story and kind of packaged them all up and wrote some introduction and summary conclusion work on analyzing what set these companies apart.
So, and the goal of writing then, what was the goal? Inspiration, documentation, call to action? What was that goal?
Well, I mean, all of that, obviously, but I have two big goals.
Okay.
The book's aimed at two groups. One is my industry peers. As we look at reshoring and reindustrialization, there's a lot of great work going on in the advanced technologies that are going to support that. So robotics and AI and new modes of automation. We're not going to compete in America if we're going head to head against developing countries' low-cost labor. It's got to be all about much higher levels of automation.
Okay.
But I think we're forgetting there are business fundamentals that aren't going to change. And these companies, so many of them that are generations old, have those lessons that we can be learning from. And so I want to present them as this kind of wrapped up object lesson. And here's how you compete and survive over decades as an American manufacturer in a very competitive marketplace. So that's one. The other is the broad audience. And it's really going back to that original goal I had when I joined up with Forbes, was to say, I get it. People think we don't make anything anymore because we're constantly talking about the negatives in manufacturing, and there are plenty of them. But there are plenty of positives. And I am very bullish. I'm very optimistic. Like I said, it's a moment I've not seen before. And I think if we re-engage with the public and say, look, this is not only a very cool place to be. Manufacturing just has some of the greatest things going on you'll ever see. I visited my first steel mill last fall, and with all my industry experience and the hundreds of plants I've been in, this was just absolutely eye-opening, seeing an electric arc furnace for the first time, the fire-breathing dragon of the industrial world, and the things you can make happen in manufacturing. So just kind of reintroducing those lessons to the broad public of, this is something vital for our national security, it's vital for our economic health, and it offers phenomenal careers for your kids and your grandkids. So let's start steering them that way.
So where would you come down on that question? That's the $64,000 question. Are we actually seeing a manufacturing resurgence?
Yes, we are undeniably seeing a manufacturing resurgence. I don't know if you've seen the latest numbers, but there's a measure that everyone touts. It's the Institute for Supply Managers PMI measure. So the packaging managers are assessed every month on their outlook, because they have that kind of supply and look at things of what's needed and how well they're getting what they need. And that was negative for months and months and months on end. About 4 months ago, it started turning positive, and it has just been doing this, just ratcheting up. And so right now, there's just a huge head of steam behind manufacturing in America. We're dealing with some tough times too. So to have that happening, even though we've got the oil shock and the tariff back and forth. If we can settle things down and really focus on that longer term, like I've talked about here, knocking down some of those barriers we've built and make ourselves more competitive, I am very bullish on manufacturing in America.
You mentioned robotics and AI. So I'm curious, what role does technology and automation realistically play in all this resurgence?
Oh, it's enormous. We won't have broad-based reindustrialization without it. Again, we can't compete if we're throwing labor at a problem, and you know that's what we did for most of our industrial existence. Now, automation goes way back. People talk about it like it's something new. The first industrial robots showed up in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So we've been slowly automating what we can, but the technology has just done such amazing things in like the last 10, 15 years that we can automate so much more. I mean, you look at warehouse automation, for example, things that used to be heavily manual, just, you know, pick and place things in the warehouse, and now it's all robotics. So people definitely need to be looking at what those opportunities are from an industrial automation element. The one I always talk about, though, is your biggest opportunity may not be on the factory floor, because there's also automation of business processes. So that's where AI, I think, is going to be huge. And I think it's not what people expect it to be. It's not eliminating the blue collar jobs. It's eliminating the white collar jobs, the rote work at a desk of you know, doing the paperwork, as we used to call it, which is all digital now. But all this digital work that's just business process, you know, documentation and moving things here and there, that's all going to be automated. But I think no matter where you look at automation, one of the kind of misapprehensions is it's eliminating broad swaths of jobs, and it can in some areas. But I think the bigger thing is it's elevating work. It's taking jobs that used to be dirty and dangerous and dull, and now making them much more challenging, higher level, you know, technician work, because people are going to have to program and maintain the computers. They're going to have to do the not just the initial applications for the AI integration with what we're doing out there in industry, but then, you know, there's whole new realms opening up, cybersecurity, things like that, where it just takes a good old-fashioned brain power to make things work right and make sure they're working efficiently and making us as good as we can be.
So you talked about opportunities, and there are several of them, which is really interesting. So what should leaders focus on because of and take advantage of those opportunities?
Well, leaders should focus on building the right team, getting the right people in the right seats, and letting them do their jobs. Remaining engaged and understanding what those teams are dealing with day to day, getting that honest look at where the challenges lie and where they, as leaders, kind of pull the levers to either make them better or fail to do so. And you know, obviously, you want to do the latter. You want to make sure that you're clearing the roadblocks for your team so they can deliver on the goods. I would never bet against Americans when it comes to manufacturing. Again, if you look at World War II, the arsenal of democracy, that war would not have been won without good old-fashioned U.S. industrial firepower. And we can do that again. And it takes that concerted effort and that focus like we had with the wartime need. I think if we look at it as that bullish, you know, this is the step we can take to bring America into that bright future, is in part getting a good chunk of our industry back and reestablishing ourselves as a dominant player in global industry and competitiveness. I think it's a very optimistic picture for sure.
That's what I'm hearing. So I'm curious then, as we sort of get to wrap things up, what would you give the most optimistic vision of American manufacturing today? Why are you so hopeful and optimistic?
Because it's engaging people again. You know, for the longest time, it's like for so much of my career, I was like this counter-revolutionary against the narrative that industry was a bad place to be and there were no good jobs and no future. I mean, I've had a whale of a good life on the back of, you know, being in manufacturing my whole career. And now people are realizing that never went away. And if we focus on it and get the right measures and incentives in place, we can make it even better than it has been, really better than it ever was. With technology, and you look at what modern factories can do, it is just mind-boggling. And so I think you're starting to see, especially, skilled trades is a great example. There is definitely a resurgence in young people going in that direction, which is marvelous. And I think we need the same kind of push in the industrial world. I actually had Mike Rowe on my Manufacturing Talks web show and podcast, and told him to his face, I want to be the Mike Rowe of manufacturing. You've done such a great job in skilled trades, and kind of re-energizing, getting youth going in that way and getting the right resources against it. And I want to have that same thing happen in industry. And, I would love to be the voice making that happen.
Well, people have a chance to hear your background and about the book. So curious then, how do they get a hold of you? Where do they find the book? So give them some information so they can go and pick up things from here.
Yep. So my main social media is LinkedIn. So just search Jim Vinoski there and connect with me. I connect with pretty much anyone who comes along. Happy to do that. Follow me on X at Jim Vinoski. I've got my Manufacturing Talks website, which is manufacturingtalks.com, and the book will be available there. It will also be available on Amazon, and I am right on the cusp of having that appear. So you won't find it just now, but within weeks it will be showing up there, and I should have the publication date going live here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that's totally picking up a head of steam, and I'm very excited. So pay close attention, because the big news is coming in a matter of days. And then, I don't mind hearing from people on my email, Jim at Vinoski.net. And yeah, feel free to connect, and I'll keep you in the loop on the book. And I've got Manufacturing Talks on YouTube. Search for that. And I've also got my Substack, Manufacturing Talks. So pretty easy to find me.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jim. It's given me more optimism, and you're an expert, so I really appreciate this. It gets me excited too about America and where we're going. Thank you for taking out some time. I know you're busy, but I appreciate your time and all your insights that you provided. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mick. Glad to hear that I boosted your view of manufacturing.
You bet. Take care. If you enjoy this program, and I hope you do, make sure that you like, subscribe, and positively review the Doctor of Digital podcast. And now I'm more optimistic after talking to Jim, because it also hits close to home, because my dad was in manufacturing, God rest his soul, and I want to see manufacturing in America come back just as strong and powerful as it was at one time. Thanks for the support of the program, and I thank the publishers of both Burning America and also On Track Ian Hunter for their support in the program. Until next time, see you next time for another exciting episode. Till then, Dr. Digital signing off.